Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for 5 Ways Fundraisers Can Beat Inflation. We'll have times to ask questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature instead of chat. With the Q&A feature, you can also upvote the questions you want to hear answered most. Let me now introduce Michael Gorriarán, the president of Arjuna Solutions. Michael?
Thanks, Doug. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I wanted to welcome you to today's call. We look forward to a great opportunity to share some concepts about what we're doing with regard to the methods of using artificial intelligence and behavioral economics modeling to defeat the effect of inflation on fundraising. And we look forward to some poll question responses from you, as well as any Q&A along the way that Doug will facilitate for us. So in moving on here, our opportunity today is to cover, let me see if I can advance the slide here. There we go. All right, a little bit of background on myself and a little background on the company, and then we'll jump right in. Net, I'm the president of Arjuna Solutions. I've been here almost 5 years now, but I invested most of my career in high technology with Microsoft and Xerox. So I was delighted to take that experience and bring it to a company that is doing such good in the world, is applying AI for good, as they say, and helping to make sure that the fundraising process is as efficient as possible in terms of both maintaining donors, providing lift, and lowering the cost per dollar raised. And these techniques have allowed us to do a lot of modeling over the last year to show how we can manage the effect of inflation while retaining donor relationships. I did have a experience earlier in my career in nonprofit, which really is a hallmark of my family involvement in the communities we lived in. My brother is still the chairman of a nonprofit in Rhode Island, in Providence, and I was the chairman of the Oregon Council for Hispanic Advancement here many years back, and really enjoyed building that organization from the ground up and figuring out how to do the fundraising and deliver the programs to support the Hispanic community here in Oregon. In terms of our company, we were established by a professor of decision sciences named Adam Treiser. You may have heard about him. He has published many articles on the use of behavioral economics modeling and fundraising. He's a brilliant person. Had the idea a long time ago, back in 2013, about taking different types of artificial intelligence, weaving them together, and being able to use that for good and applying it to the fundraising process. His aspiration, and his family, similar to mine, was oriented around community service. He wanted to provide a better financial foundation to the nonprofit sector, and he's been fulfilling this now for almost a decade. He spent about 4 years in R&D, and that's when his patents were awarded. And in 2018, I had the privilege of joining the organization, where we came together to figure out how to bring our capabilities to nonprofits across the country. We are serving every sector of nonprofit, from health and human services to national public radio and television, to the higher education segment, religious institutions. So we have been able to be successful in fundraising and lowering the cost per dollar raised across many sectors. Over the course of 2018 to 2022, we started to mature as an organization. We're still considered a small business in the sense of we only have about 25 people in the organization. And we have established a deep domain expertise in the application of AI for the purposes I've been mentioning. Our hallmark of this is really that we're almost at the process, or the point right now, I should say, of processing almost 10 billion records for nonprofit organizations. And we've implemented through our pilot programs, the initial way we work with clients, about 100 million, it's 110 million of incremental donations over the course of the last 4 years. So we're very proud of our impact on the nonprofit community. And we are especially proud of the recent innovations we've brought to market about mitigating the effect of inflation, which have now been in market over the last year. So if we think about the conversation today, we're going to talk a little bit about the new focus in fundraising, which really has been around, but we've been able to motivate donors to help with the fundraising process in a more systemic way, where they're sustained at the right level of giving, and then also lowering the cost per dollar raised. You'll hear a lot about the combination of the two with behavioral economics modeling that drives an improvement in net proceeds. Optimizing donor lifetime value is another piece we'll talk about, how you can use AI to do that. Personalizing relationship investment decisions at scale, which means how often do you solicit and how do you do your solicitations to optimize giving, and then minimize cost as well. finding new value in the lapsed file. So in order to use AI to model behavior of lapsed donors and knowing whom to engage, when and how. And then the last one is measuring fundraising performance. Coming from a commercial background as I do, I think it's very interesting to see how nonprofits work and how distinctly different it is from commercial enterprises. And we have a model we're trying to do to blend the two together, best of both worlds, to really drive performance in a fundamentally more effective manner. So we'll cover those topics today. So today's fundraising environment, I'm going to do a little poll with you right now. So Doug's going to help me out with this, please, Doug. And here's the question, so feel free to respond. And is your organization feeling the impact of inflation? First response is no, what's inflation? Second one is no, not yet, but we're seeing it coming. The third one is yes, it's becoming an increasing issue. And then the fourth one is yes, it hurts, right? You're really feeling it a lot. So what's inflation? No, not yet, but it's coming. Yes, it's becoming an increasing issue, and yes, it hurts. So Doug, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to give us our poll respondents here.
Okay, people are still voting. Let's give another second here.
Sure. Yeah.
It's actually interesting. People are voting really quickly. There seems to be some strong points of view on this.
It's very nice to see that right out of the gates, right?
Okay, folks, 3, 2, 1, and here it is. And let me share the results with everybody. So, Michael, we have 45% saying no, not yet, but we see it coming. We have 49% saying yes, it's becoming an increasing issue, and 6% saying yes, it hurts.
Right. All right. So I think 55% of the people here are in our camp, Doug, where we're seeing this actually being a profound impact on fundraising in a way that we never anticipated. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I saw an article which we're happy to share with you. If you haven't seen it, it was in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And the statistic that they shared with us was the number of people making gifts under $100 dropped 17% so far this year in the poll that they did with nonprofits. Between $101 and $500 in annual giving, it dropped 8%. The number of people providing gifts dropped 8%. On our end, we're seeing the gifts actually become smaller. So when we look at the gifts below $100, I'll talk more about this, we're seeing a precipitous drop off, not just in the 17% I mentioned with regard to fewer donors, but also the dollars are going down. And that's where we felt like the effective inflation was very profound, below 100. So we'll talk more about that. All right, Doug, thanks for the help with the poll, and I'll move on to the presentation. So close that up. And so if I come down to advance the slide here real quick, interesting, there we go. Okay, so those are the questions, and let's go to the next one. So the headlines, no surprise to us. You have a few things going on here, which is that, as I mentioned, donor participation is heading a little bit in the wrong direction. Giving levels heading a little bit in the wrong direction. There are positive signs above 100. I'll talk more about this, $100 in annual giving. But there's also a profound amount of episodic giving going on right now. And knowing how to properly engage these types of donors that come in because of the emotion in the moment, and how to retain them as a donor, and ensuring that that is done over a lifetime of giving is one of the important things we'll talk about today. But as I look at 2021, around September 2021, we started seeing this trend happen, not because of inflation, but because of the post-vaccination environment. So what happened, at least from our point of view, in the clients that we serve, and we're modeling substantial number of clients and a substantial volume of solicitations, we are in the last 4 years at about 10 billion, with a B, 10 billion records processed. So we've seen all aspects of the nonprofit sector and the giving trends that is associated with the time frame I'm talking about. Around September last year, many people had received their vaccinations and they started re-engaging in the economy. So they were spending money on entertainment, travel, dining, clothes, etc., coming out of that hibernation period of the COVID-19 sequestering. As a result of that, spending started to go elsewhere than nonprofit giving, whereas during COVID, it had been very, very focused on helping communities dealing with COVID and other things like that, that really stimulated a lot of nonprofit success. We saw a weakness starting, as I mentioned, in September last year and all the way through the fourth quarter, because there was simply less disposable income. And the second thing we saw is that in donor categories, I mentioned below $100, that's 73% of the population that we serve, by the way. But below that, at $75, $50 and below, we saw a fundamental weakness in giving that's commensurate with the Chronicle of Philanthropy's fundraising survey. And as a result of that, when we got into the February-March timeframe, we saw this trend of the declining disposable income get really hammered by the effect of inflation. And as a result of that, you started seeing things happen in two respects. You started seeing people have smaller gifts, which is really critical at this particular level of giving, which is a huge part of the population of fundraising. That you're in a situation all of a sudden where the gifts start to dwindle in size and volume, as I mentioned. But then on the fundraising side itself, on the supply side itself, the cost of paper, envelopes, postage, freight, labor, 15 to 20% increase. And then in order to even get what you needed, you had to be ordering out 10 months or 12 months in terms of the direct mail, the paper itself, envelopes itself, for direct mail solicitations. And the opportunity to then switch from direct mail solicitations to digital is kind of a fallacy, because I come from that environment. I know digital extremely well. And in fundraising, we deal with lots of clients making the balance decision between digital and direct mail, and definitely have to have both. It's not that you can have one or the other, but the idea that you can switch things to digital and it is less expensive is a fallacy, because the platform itself was becoming more expensive. No matter whose platform you use, the platform itself was becoming more expensive. The applications then in the platform to make the platform do what you want was causing the price to go up as well. Integration into the ongoing systems that you have in management and labor was becoming more expensive, because the people to run these systems became very expensive. So if the idea around digital is to do more volume, that actually deteriorates participation from donors, and it actually dilutes your brand equity. So you have to be very balanced with both in terms of the investment decision on direct mail and the digital situation of not over soliciting and causing people to disengage from receiving your solicitations. So these types of factors around real costs being able to come up were a material impact on operating decisions for all nonprofits last year. And then, as I alluded to earlier, the episodic giving, whether it was the war in Ukraine, decisions by courts, or laws being changed, or natural disasters, or social, a lot of things have been changing in the environment, as you know, and that has stimulated episodic giving. The challenge is, how do you sustain that giving? So we're seeing fewer donors, smaller gifts, negative growth for the low end of giving, especially below 75, below 50. There is still elasticity that's been very nice to be able to identify between 100 and 1,000, and between 1,000 and 10,000. And these are the success cases we'll talk about today. So as I mentioned earlier, focusing on improved net proceeds is the new thing we're spending much more time on with clients right now. Before, it was all about growth in fundraising and making sure there were more and more dollars, and that's probably never going to end. But the idea now is to get more efficient growth, is to lower the cost per dollar raised while we're being able to drive growth. So I was going to ask this question, Doug, if you could help me out. How would you determine the ask for your donors? So when you're going to actually ask a donor for a solicitation, you'll see the poll come up in a second. What formula are you using? Are you using MRC, most recent contribution, or highest previous contribution times some multiple like 1, 1, 5, or 2? That's one option. Are you using wealth screening to determine how much to ask of a donor? And I'm talking about direct response donors, below $10,000 a year. And in the segment of one personalization idea, are you determining in some method a segment of one where you know donor by donor how much to ask? Or is there some other method that you're using to determine how much to ask of a donor? And the reason we ask for this methodology is that this is what we will compare and contrast with in terms of how AI is working, is that you can use a lot of different capabilities to be able to determine ask arrays, and they do differ by level of giving, but it is an opportunity for improvement and efficiency in some fundamental ways now that have not existed in the past. So Doug, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to give us some insights on the results in the survey.
Okay, we saw some votes coming in. We'll give it a couple more seconds here.
Okay.
We're seeing some trends here. And okay, let me turn it off and share the results.
There you go.
So MRC HPC is about 56%, while screening 18%, tied with segment of 1 to 18%, and 8% have an other going.
Wonderful. This is really representative of what we see. Is we see the first one being the standard in the industry for direct response fundraising. and it's being used ubiquitously. The challenge with this one we'll talk more about is the lack of personalization. And there's new ways of doing much more targeted personalization. Wealth screening is usually for actually higher end giving above 10,000, which is not in the direct response category. And that's very useful in that environment because capacity is critical above 10,000 annually. And then segment of one personalization, we would love to know what you're actually doing here. So maybe you can let us know off the broadcast today, but this is where we think is the area we focus on, where we think that there's real opportunity here. And other, I'm not sure what the three are, but I'd love to see if there's something new that we don't know about. But thank you for participating in the survey. And it gives us a good sense of where you're coming from in terms of your fundraising practices. So let's see here, move on to the next one. So improving net proceeds, as in this particular section, we'll talk about this, very simple, which is simply the average gift times the number of donors minus the cost of solicitations. And the idea here is making sure you're balancing the concept of improving giving with retention of donors and then minimizing the cost per dollar raised. And as I mentioned, this is pertinent both in digital channels and in direct mail. And you can use AI to model the idea of which channels and what frequency. And being able to do this with behavioral economics modeling gives you a real good sense of the sentiment that the donor has toward the organization and its mission, and knowing when to ask and how much to ask. And so this capability is called behavioral economics modeling. And the service that we deliver is behavioral economics modeling with artificial intelligence. We use the algorithms that we have patented, as I mentioned earlier, in Adam's fundamental and seminal work for the company at Johns Hopkins University. So an enhancement and lift of giving, what we are seeing right now is the average lift in giving is around 12% where you're using these capabilities. And the range on that is around 4% to 27%. And there are different factors in there, which is the type of campaign, the channel you use for solicitation, and then the timing of things in terms of how you're aligned with the donor. And all of these different types of factors are important. The type of campaign matters as well, whether it's lapsed or it's a renewal, things like that, or it's an acquisition. But that's the range that we're still delivering for clients with these capabilities. And the next thing about this is not about lift at the expense of donors, because the concept in the industry is the more you ask, the fewer donors you have. And when we talk with people like Shannon McCracken, whom you may know from the NonProfit Association, CEO of the NonProfit Association, and her expertise in working with us in organizations where she, like Charity Navigator, where she was the CDO, the idea is optimizing the lifetime of giving. So keeping donors is the most important solution to provide while you're optimizing giving. And then lastly, it's advancing donors across segments. So as you have donors coming in at 25 or 50 or 500 or 1,000, it's how do you sustain them while they're optimized over a lifetime? And that lifetime can be anywhere from 3 years to 11 years. Like we have Swarthmore at 11 years. We have other organizations we serve that are in a 3 to 5 year range, but optimizing giving over the course of time. And then the net is, how do you determine how often to solicit? And this is a direct mail piece, is a hard dollar savings. And the idea of looking at the psychology, the sentiment of the donor with behavioral economics modeling, and then determining, is this the optimal time or the right time to be able to make that solicitation? And if each solicitation is 50, 70, 90 cents, that's the range we normally see, the fully loaded cost of a direct mail solicitations in that range, then by dropping the number of solicitations per month, you don't lose donors or lose dollars, you just save money. And so by optimizing with AI the top of the equation, the giving aspects, and then minimizing the excessive solicitation, you just deliver better net proceeds. So the summary is, instead of focusing on growth, which is not the equation right now, especially below $100, it's focusing on net proceeds by optimizing the cost piece of it and making sure you're not excessively or economically making the gifts that are provided not viable, and doing that in an intelligent one-by-one way with donors. So it's a personalized decision about how much to ask and when to ask with each donor singularly in the context of one nonprofit at one moment in time. So it's donor by donor individual modeling that lets you conclude, how often to engage and how much to ask. And that allows you to drive net proceeds. As I mentioned earlier, above $100, above $1,000, up to the $10,000 range we're in, we're seeing a lot of great movement there. So we still see a lot of lift. And in that environment, we don't see this thing where you're going to be soliciting less per se. It's more about soliciting more effectively to mitigate the effect of inflation and take advantage of the opportunities in donor sentiment when they are really aligned to you. And this is particularly effective with episodic donors where you get a large gift and you have to come in at the next level, or the next request at the right level, I should say. So that's the first point. The second point I want to focus on is on optimizing donor lifetime value. And here is the opportunity to understand donor sentiment in its projection for future giving. And there's a lot of ways of doing this, but one of the most important things is to know precisely how much to ask today for the type of campaign, for the channel of solicitation, and then advance donors effectively across the giving segments. And so the idea is when you're making the ask to be able to look over the horizon of a lifetime of giving and model it effectively. And this is particularly challenging with episodic donors to secure their gift in the next go around. Or if people have gone lapsed, which means they haven't made a gift in more than 25 months, how do you know whom to solicit to be able to get them to reactivate their giving at the right level of giving? And this is where we spend a lot of times consulting with our clients and helping them make these types of decisions. But net, the problem we're trying to solve is that when you're using a direct response tool, whether it's digital or it's analog and printed, there's usually gift array values that are embedded into the solicitations. And these gift array values can have 3, or they can have 4, 5, 6 levels of giving that you might request. The 3 is the one, and doing billions of records as we have done over the last several years, is 3 is the one that has the highest response, plus a little line for other, because people can make a gift as they wish in any value they wish. And these values are just suggested values. But the idea is that when you're using something like RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value to segment donors, and then you're using something like highest previous contribution or the most recent contribution or an average of the last 3 contributions, you don't want to be in a solicitation situation where you miss the mark with the donor. So by using behavioral economics modeling in the inflationary environment we are in, we're measuring donor sentiment in real time. So while the last gift may be an interesting insight, especially if you have a history of other gifts, measuring the donor sentiment in real time in an inflationary environment is the trick to securing the gift today. And we have a high degree of accuracy in being able to do that. So we find the donor where they are in the demand curve. So if your low-end gift here is $50 and your high-end, medium size, I should say, is 100, and the next one is 150, that would be a standard type of solicitation metric, if you will, across the existing methods we see that were mentioned as, I think, more than 55% of the audience uses. The idea is to be more subtle about that, so that you find the donor precisely where they exist on the demand curve, and you're building a set of gift array values that are pertinent to them. We also don't usually typically have symmetrical ones. We can have a symmetrical one, but that's not the set of gift array values here are usually customized where the first amount asked of the donor. So if the donor is up here and this is a $50 request, we may come in at $75 on that request because that's where the donor exists. The next gift may be something like 90, and the next one may be 110, something like that. So they're not necessarily symmetrical because the first gift array that we're modeling with the AI, the behavioral economics AI, is the donor sentiment, getting that value right. The other 2 are measures of elasticity based on where we see that donor existing in the clusters of donors that are inside an organization that we're helping with fundraising. We have up to around 70 different personas in many of our organizations, different types of donors. And by modeling that behavior effectively and looking at the sentiment effectively, especially with the inflation factor now, we know where the donor is in their giving level, and we also know the range around that giving that is their elasticity. And getting that right is the little extra special thing that we deliver to our organizations that help them be successful in their fundraising. We don't do something like the actual campaign, or we don't supplant the marketing organization, or we don't supplant marketing internally. That's somebody else's responsibility. This is specifically about using behavioral economics to model sentiment in the inflation times we're in and getting the ask amounts correct. Okay, so it's a unique point of equilibrium for each donor at each moment in time. So there's several different types of giving. I've been alluding to these. Major giving, where you have a one-to-one ask, and there's a deep relationship between either a planned giving officer or a major giving officer, and really knowing how to cultivate that relationship, the motivation, the timing, the gift amount. And that's a brilliant set of capabilities for those who have that skill. All we're doing is with artificial intelligence is we are using segment of one modeling of behavior to personalize gift array values up to $10,000 in annual giving. And then by doing that, we're trying to model the behavior we see of the donor in a very objective manner. It's never going to be as good as a major giving officer with that, connection and that relationship. But for what you can measure at scale, it's a brilliantly economical way to have a better method of understanding how much to ask of a donor, especially today with inflation, than the existing methods we've been talking about, RFM plus an MRC and a multiple, which is, we saw that a lot in this survey. So that's the idea, is to make sure you have a segment of one capability and you're modeling individual donor relationships at every moment in time, is dynamic personalization at scale in a highly economical manner. So when we look about how this works, or look at how this works, is we are looking at every channel, trying to optimize the balance across the channel in terms of how the volume is spread around and the cadence of the volume that comes from these channels, whether it's direct mail, online registered user, email, telemarketing, SMS text, et cetera, any place where a gift array can be embedded, we want that personalized for that moment in time. And we're constantly searching with behavioral economics for the right point of equilibrium in the gift amount that's being requested at that moment in time. And then what it looks like, this is a direct mail example. This could be in any of the mediums that you've seen on the left here. The channel is agnostic. This can be embedded anywhere. But we're looking at things like this is the University of Oregon. I'm in Oregon. This is where I live. My wife is an alum there. And what I like about this is the personalization. It tells us about, hey, these are the places you've made investments in the past here. Would you consider making another gift, of course? At the top of this, you don't see it in this particular illustration, but it says, Dear Michael and Christina. So it's personalized. It talks about where we've invested before, personalized. What screams lack of insight is the gift array values here. We've been donating for years to this organization, and they don't seem to understand where we are in the gift array range. So they gave us this idea of 300, 500, 750, 1,000. As I mentioned, we can do any number of gift array values to get this right, but we would never give a gift array value that goes to a multiple of 3x when the donor's sentiment does not reflect that that's the range in which they make a gift. It might be something that's much more closely aligned between, the 300 and 500, something that's tighter around where the donor exists. And getting that right helps with the personalization, where they know that you know them. And by asking the right amount in this environment, you get them to make a gift faster at the right amount, instead of for them saying they don't know me. And this is the opportunity at hand here across the industry, is just making that subtle change to getting it really right in an environment where, especially below $100, there's more sensitivity. On the high end, you may not have just, and I say high end up to $10,000 annually, you may not use a direct response solicitation like this. You may use a planned giving officer or a major giving officer or a mid-level donor giving officer, depending on the nature of your organization. And obviously we would consult with them on the correct amounts for the individual that's being considered. And like Swarthmore College, when I was working with Fritz Ward there, he used to determine the gift array values for each of his alumni personally. It took him 40 hours a year to do this. He did it during the summer, and he left those locked and loaded for the entire year. We've gotten much more subtle with him about asking the right amount at the right time. It's taken a burden off him, and he's been able to do substantially better in terms of the fundraising over the last 12 to 24 months of working with us. And you can see that case study on our website. So we look about what's happening underneath everything that's going on here. A lot of the tests that we do with organizations, and this is a good example of something that happened over the last 18 months, is you're setting up the opportunity for a test. I'll move this control panel out of the way here. You're setting up, excuse me, an opportunity to be able to test equal groups of donors. In this particular case, it's we blended together a couple of organizations so we could anonymize the results here. But this is very typical across each group we work with. So in this case, this is an opportunity for the donations ranging from 100 to 1,000 in this particular study. So the control group was the white, the blue is the treatment group. We started out with relatively equal average single gift, 68 versus 69. Standard deviation around that average gift was $94 versus $96. So very similar types of giving attributes in these control versus treatment studies. So when we look at what happens after the treatment period, and this is usually in the range of 9 to 12 months, is what this starts to happen here, is the same number of donors are participating on the right side, but we're seeing with behavioral economics modeling where these donors exist in terms of their elasticity in the moment where they're being asked. And what's brilliant about this is while giving was declining during that time frame, you had a situation where some donors were able to make more attractive gifts to the organization, as I mentioned, while retaining the same number of donors. So the average single gift dropped from the left at 68 to 53 in the control group. You can see the standard deviation around that gift was $94 versus $81. We had a similar effect in the treatment group where it was 56 instead of 69. And 112 is very important because we moved the standard deviation of giving substantially above where we started at $97, roughly 96.91. So as a result of that, we ended up producing, these are two organizations, one a little larger than the other, an incremental giving over a small part of their pilot, a small part of their file. This is the renewal file, and the average distribution was 100 to 1,000, as I mentioned, and we found an extra $142,000 by being able to move the standard deviation for some of the group members. And by shifting that curve a little bit to the right, you can see this blue line right here instead of the white line here. That shift allowed us to generate that extra income. And because we are looking at lifetime giving, that is not episodic giving. It allows you to sustain that incremental amount over a lifetime of giving. So this is what's happening under the under the cover, so to speak, in terms of the background, is we're finding the donor lifetime value and seeing where the opportunity is to ask a little bit more, or if it's a second gift, get that number correctly, or a special appeal, get that number correctly to move people to the next level of giving. And this is just an illustration of what happened when the pilot started. You can see the history, very similar between the control group and the treatment group. And then when you see the right side here, after the pilot started, the left side shows a separation in giving, the right side so it shows that you have the same number of people giving. So getting this right in today's environment is the difference between fundraising success and fundraising sub-optimization. And we have a very interesting capability of behavioral modeling that allows us to be able to discern this among donor populations. Now, I'd love to say everything is always the upside, right? But upside sometimes is managing the downside. And the reality of it is, even in some levels of giving, and this is for these two organizations, so this is not the entire portfolio, but this is just these two organizations, you do have some downside. So when you're looking at the upside, which is great, you look at this less than $25 segment, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, so on and so forth, all these segments. What you're seeing is that a solution that is on the behavioral economics modeling is tuned. There's a different algorithm for each donor segment. There are 4 in the low end of the algorithm and 1 for mid-level. And what we're seeing just simply is, are we doing better than the existing practices, and by how much? We want to see like 36, 31, 38% better. But even on the downside, where donors are reconsidering their giving and have a situation where they are succumbing to providing a gift, but a less attractive gift, is how much do you not lose in the gift value? So we do ask for less because our first delimiter is securing the donor, retaining the donor. The second piece is then how much to ask. And the ask is not today, but over a lifetime of giving. So you can see in this segment for these two clients, they had the gift drop off with us at $50, but we're securing the same number of donors. The 100 drop off was what they experienced across the file. And when you look above this level, you see 1,000 to 2,500 and 2,500 and above. And this starts to become a real material difference, because you're looking at, we're securing a gift here that is 55 or 54% drop off rather than this type of drop off. So you're looking at a $500 range instead of a $1,000 drop off. And you can see it's even more precipitous above 2,500 for these two organizations. So while they're raising more money, they did have a situation. They also were losing some donor value. And so you're trying to balance those two by knowing what can you secure on the downside and where can you get the upside. And that's the brilliance of using behavioral economics and artificial intelligence. It's unsupervised, so it's doing it on its own. And it's doing the kind of work that a major giving officer would be able to do one-on-one, but doing it across a broad population of millions of solicitations to be able to discern how to retain the audience at the optimal level of giving. So when we look at this cumulative lift, these two organizations I'm talking about here, you can see what was happening. We do a baseline discovery process where we model out what we think is the right amount for each of the donors. And then we begin testing it during a pilot period. And there are rounds of learning that have to take place. Each of these rounds of learning is about 3 to 4 months in length. and you can really start to see the algorithm improving and improving and improving. These are actually the results that we were able to experience with those two organizations. And once it's at the end of the pilot, then the client can determine, well, now that you've modeled, say, 20% of my file, why don't we look at the next level of work together? And is that renewal? Is that lapsed? Is it lowering the cost of solicitations, et cetera, et cetera? And then to deploy it more in a production mode where you might move it to 50, 80%, 100% of the renewal file. You pick up 50% of the lapse file, et cetera. But these are pilot tests that we use that are relatively small. Like I mentioned, say 20% of the file, that allows you to see the economic benefit of using AI to be able to model out donor sentiment and determine how much to ask or when to ask to get the optimal amount of giving. In this case, these two clients, there's different two clients actually. They had $795 in improved giving, and most importantly, the return on investment was 223%. So they were getting $3.23 for every dollar invested with us. We're very conscientious about making sure that there is a compelling return on investment. Since we do all the work for our clients, we deliver this as a simple service. There's no hiring or training or technology to deploy. We just find out where you want the gift to raise, and we insert them into that workflow at the moment of solicitation, which can be digital or it can be direct. And by doing that effectively, we're able to seamlessly and in a friction-free environment optimize performance in fundraising more effectively, up to about $10,000 a year in giving. So in summary, it's all about retention first, then knowing how much to ask today. And this can be used in repeat campaigns where you might ask for that second gift or you might ask for that special appeal. So you're constantly optimizing for each type of request. And then you're doing that to advance donors over the giving segments over the course of time. So the next thing I want to talk about is making the relationship investment decision at scale in a personalized manner. And what that means, and I love this graphic, our CTO selected this one. I thought it was perfect. And what it means basically is for each individual, do you know when is the appropriate time to engage them? We can detect that because we're doing sentiment modeling. So it allows you to determine the optimal cadence, because every time a solicitation is going out, whether it's digital or it's analog, we're looking at the donor and determining whether or not the donor lifetime value is moving up or down as one of the discerning factors about whether to solicit them now. And this is a fundamentally important thing, especially below $75 and below $50 in annual giving, because instead of mailing 12 or 18 or 24 solicitations to someone providing a $25 gift or a $50 gift, you may be very successful in sustaining the same type of fundraising level and the same participation rate while you are soliciting less. It doesn't mean you just stop soliciting, but there are three types of donors, and it's important to know where the donor exists in a broad sense, and then where they exist individually when you're making a decision on fundraising. And this is a horizontal view. So we look at files in two ways. We look at files by the category of donor, which I'm going to talk about here, and then we look at them individually at that moment in time to make a decision about whether to invest in a solicitation. So in this particular case, you have 93.9% of solicitations produce $0, which means you have about a 6% response rate. Nothing wrong with a 6% response rate, but that's what this particular set of files indicates here. More importantly, and more importantly for a discerning nonprofit fundraising professional, is you have 70% of the solicitations went to individuals who do not even provide any donation, period. And that's the darkest area right here. So when you're looking at this and we're modeling this out, we can quickly identify who actually is in this dark category, which means they're either going lapsed or they already are lapsed. And we look at that across the file. We look at the whole file every month. We're modeling across the whole file, donor file every month. And the idea is simply to reduce the volume of solicitations to donors who you anticipate are never going to make a gift. But this is not universally happening now. We see our clients treating the donors who are in this first category I'm describing, where they're not going to make any gift, as the same as the donors who are making regular gifts either annually or more than once a year. And that really is a tragedy, because you're investing the time and money to do that work when it's never going to be fruitful in any way. So what we're trying to do is say, let's not just drop them out, but after looking at this particular group, can we identify who they are and then look at that as a way in which we can reduce volume precipitously? And this is not a standard formula. You don't go from 24 to 4. it looks at each donor's sentiment and puts them into the correct track for solicitation, which could be moving it from 24 to 4, but it's not a blanket strategy. So get that down as quickly as possible. The white category is that you have a donor that, like I am a donor like this, once a year in December, I make my gifts. And I usually don't do anything else during the year. I know how much I've made. I know how much we want to make in charitable contributions, and I make my gifts. The trick here is understanding how often to solicit me. And there's two types of solicitations. There's cultivation, as you know, with the marketing information about the fulfillment of your mission. And the other type is straight up solicitation, asking for money. And sometimes they are melded together. Nothing wrong with that. We optimize the cadence of those types of correspondence to ensure that it is an appropriate number of times for the donor who is being solicited in this white category, where they make a gift once a year. And the idea here is not to drop it off like you would in the dark category here, the dark gray category, but to look at the white donors individually, person by person. Like you can put them in this group, but then you have to look at them personally and deciding when and how often to solicit them. And that's what you can do with behavioral economics modeling. The last one is the more than one response per year, the green category. Someone's passionate about the mission. Every time you request something from them, like a special appeal or a second gift, they're stepping up to be able to provide a contribution. Could lead to 2 gifts a year, 3 gifts a year. And this is an area where you may not stop soliciting at all, but you're just trying different marketing campaigns to keep them informed on the success of the mission, the needs of the mission, and then getting the cadence of solicitations done correctly. By doing this, you end up having a more intelligent way of personalizing both the ask amount and the frequency of engagement on the ask, as well as the frequency of engagement on the marketing category of, giving them the information about the mission. So this allows you to save 10 to 30% on the hard dollar cost of direct mail solicitations, and it also optimizes your digital platform performance. And this is a view of 2 organizations melded together where their experience, and these are donations that are below $50 for these 2 organizations, their experience is that the more they solicit, so the average number of solicitations in a year, the more that they solicit, the actual less money they are making. And so we try to keep them in this sweet spot, but it took us a while to sell them on the idea of doing this type of work, of lowering their solicitation count to be in the sweet spot of the combination of revenue optimization and lowering the cost per dollar raised. But this has been profoundly successful for them. So when we think about behavioral economic modeling, and we look at how we determine this, is we're just simply saying, if this is a linear regression, so in other words, you are reducing your volume of direct mail, how much money can you make to in the other side of the equation, which is improving net proceeds, not losing donors and not getting less in fundraising, but doing it in a more economically viable manner. So if your average, I think the average we're seeing recently on the cost per piece mail is between 70 and 80%, 70 to 80 cents per unit, for something like this in a direct mail side. And I had a client the other day that was at 68 cents per unit. So in other words, every time that they are backing up down the supply side of doing the solicitations, they're saving 68 cents per unit. So if it's a $500,000 cost in this model, their gross revenue looks like this, where they are up at $12.50 in the month. It's a month-by-month service. It's not like a blanket annual service. It's month-by-month assessment. But they're netting out about $750,000 in this current equation. When they move to the sweet spot, which you can see in these lines, fundraising is peaking out for both of these lines here. And you start figuring out what is the solicitation volume that you should be at in that month, the optimized net proceeds improvement, then you actually should have been spending $350,000 instead of $150,000. Your actuals were 1.248 instead of 1.250, but your net is 898 instead of 150. And that's what this looks like in delivery using behavioral economics to manage both the fundraising side and the cost minimization side. It looks like this. The tool produces something like this for us internally. Then we send back the donors we think you should be soliciting instead of the whole group you could be soliciting. And we determine this in conjunction with the marketing agency and the fundraising organization, or if marketing is in-house, there's the fundraising organization. We have a quick call. We're seeing this at 30% reduction. So we want to be able to improve net proceeds to 897 by minimizing the expenses of soliciting that month at 350. And that allows us to gain an incremental $147,000 in that month. In this case, the cost of doing this, you look at the ROI, is you're making $2.81 for every dollar invested. So your ROI is about 181% in the month. So you're saving a lot of money and you're making a compelling ROI by doing individual behavioral modeling to determine whether or not to solicit somebody. So in summary, is optimizing solicitation cadence gives you the opportunity to reduce the cost per dollar raised, sustain brand equity, and keep your fundraising at the highest level possible. In Lapse, you have a similar paradigm where in a Lapse campaign, somebody who has not been giving a donation for 25 to 60 months or 25 to 59 months, what we see is the most predominant model is recency. If we're going to engage some part of the Lapse file, let's just engage the donors who made a gift 25 months ago, 26 months ago, 27 months ago, 28 months ago, et cetera, until you have spent your budget that you've allocated for Lapse. It is a profoundly inappropriate thing to do to just engage the entire Lapse file and do that 6 times a year. That is the least effective, least meaningful approach to optimizing the participation from a Lapse file. It's much more interesting to do either something like this or something like I'll show you in a moment, but recency is not a bad idea. They say, I'm going to invest enough to cover 30% of my file because that's what I have, and I've got to do some acquisition as well, et cetera. So let's go after the 30% who are the most recent donors. The shape of their giving looks like this, where you have a relatively lower amount of giving, but you have a higher participation rate. So if I go to the right side here, you have a relatively high response rate compared to the other 2 models I'm going to show you. And then you have a relatively medium donor lifetime value, which means how long are they going to be around? And that's reflected in the retention as well. And the average gift is moderate. It's not super high. So nothing wrong with that. And I see people using the combination of recency in the next model all the time, which is propensity. So if you have a museum, for instance, and I'm engaging with my family in that museum 4 times a year, 6 times a year, I'm getting a lot of value out of that. If you know who I am, you can use the propensity model and you can use both of them at the same time. And you can balance across recency and propensity with the different solicitations. But the idea is that a person like me who's using the museum a lot is going to make a higher gift because I'm getting a lot of value. My family is really enjoying themselves there. But there are fewer of me than there are in the recency response thing. So when you look at the shape of the giving on the right here, you get a higher level of donor lifetime value, but you get fewer respondents and you have a better level of retention and you get a better giving level. Again, nothing wrong with that. If you get the combination of the 2, you're in between these 2 shapes. So our Chief Technology Officer, Rachel Michael, she did a brilliant job of doing an extensive amount of modeling with a tool that is now branded as Exact Donor. And Exact Donor does something very unique where at every moment in time, it tells you whom to be soliciting from the file of Lapse donors. And so there's an aspect of Exact Donor, which is the propensity to give. And then there's also the optimal level of giving. So it's who has the highest level of propensity at the highest level of giving. And let's ask those donors. As a result of that, the view of our performance relative to these other models looks like this. We have the higher donor lifetime value. We have a little bit less in the response rate, but we have a higher retention rate. So within the year, not looking at the multi-year impact, but within the year, we have a much higher level of giving. And that performance is anywhere from 35 to 55% higher level of giving. And so you're really getting the right donors to reactivate. And over a lifetime, the effect is profound. So when we look at how that looks in terms of these different models, it looks like this. If I look at the recency model and I look at, I've decided to fund 35% of my Lapse file and go after those. This is just a more economical way of doing this. You never want to engage the entire Lapse file. You want to make a bet on how much you're going to engage and then make a bet on which model you want to use. But if you look at this recency and you look at recency on the right, on the left here, we are getting 56% higher level than the recency model. So the delta here is 56%. If I look at the propensity, it's a little bit better, but we're still getting 44% higher level of giving. And so really getting the right formula with the right folks in Lapse, especially in an inflationary environment where more people are going to be moving to Lapse, is how do you re-engage them with the right level of giving is what we do here. This was a very moderate file. If I look at the audience here, average give $50, response rate only 1.5%, lift was 128,000, cost was 70,000. So the return on investment is 83%. And cost depends on volume with us. So if you look at the different costs involved, the more volume you do, the lower the cost is. And there's a different attribute for each one of the donor segments. But this is a very inexpensive, it's a dime for the core solution, where we're giving the actual ask amounts a dime for each solution. And we're producing back anywhere between 15 and 30 cents. And so it's a very handsome return on investment. And you know that it's more important to sustain existing, reactivate lapsed than trying to acquire new. So we spend a lot of time with our clients in the area of both renewals and, in this case, lapsed. So summary net, oops, I went a little fast there. Summary net is we're able to find the optimal point of value, new form of value in lapsed campaigns. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is measuring performance. And we have some advice and recommendations on best practices that we have observed. So when we serve a lot of clients, we see a lot of practices. And the thing here that we would like to articulate is that the principles around measuring performance should be holistic, it should be objective, and it should be transparent. And what I mean by that is simply that if you look at direct attribution, you are depriving yourselves of looking at the donor. And we focus on the donor, not the attribution by channel. This is a classic and critical failure point of nonprofit fundraising, is when you start saying, I mailed out from this channel, that I get a response from this channel. That's like giving the donor a way of behaving that is unnatural to today's giving. Because I get these direct mail solicitations, I've been showing you the one for the University of Oregon, at home all the time. And I might get a reminder in email. And then I'm looking at both of those over the course of time. So let's get the ask amount correct and the cadence correct. But when I make my gift, I just log in and I put my gift in through that type of channel. So when we look at the indirect attribution, which is really the logical thing to do, if you're influencing a donor, it's channel agnostic, it's campaign agnostic. You're trying to get donor behavior to change by doing behavioral economics modeling. You have all this other area. This is mutually exclusive from the direct attribution approach, is you have all of this gain over here that is the benefit to the organization. And when I deal with really mature nonprofits that are looking at things in both ways, we have really compelling conversations because we're moving donors up the levels of giving. We're also moving them to planned giving. We're moving them to major giving by knowing how to model their behavior. So one of the things we are really working extensively on with our organizations, the organizations we serve, is to make sure we look at the whole picture on things and get funding to support the use of this type of capability across the different channels. So you want full impact reporting to be able to get both the direct and indirect. And I wanted to ask this question real quickly, and we're tight on time, so I'll ask you very quickly, Doug. Do you use zero-based budgeting? If you have one more opportunity to answer a question, I would love to get a response to this. Do you use zero-based budgeting always, sometimes, seldomly? The reason I'm asking on this one is because zero-based budgeting is a really powerful tool because it allows you to do intelligent things around dynamic resource allocation to take advantage of things that are really working for you in real time. I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment here, but Doug, results from the survey, please.
Yep, the results are 9% always, 36% sometimes, 18% seldom, and 36% never.
Okay, so I think there's an opportunity, and everybody should look at their budgeting methods, you know, with whatever culture you have established with your organization as being successful. But I have spent a ton of time in my life using zero-based budgeting. At Microsoft, I was the chief operating officer for the organization that was covering the enterprise accounts, the largest accounts in the US. I regularly use zero-based budgeting when I did my annual budget, and I use dynamic resource allocation during the course of the year. So what I mean by zero-based budgeting is that in today's environment and in any other environment that I've been able to lead over the last decade, is I feel like it was really important to start with there were no assumptions. Everything had to be justified. Every program and every person had to be justified. And that if we were going to make an investment in a particular go-to-market strategy, whether it was marketing or business development or sales, or it was oriented around partners, we always looked at it where there was no given that we were going to continue doing anything. Every year, everybody looked at the strategic impact, the financial impact, and the length of time to realization. And that's the fundamentals of zero-based budgeting. By doing that, we had the opportunity then to justify and make a real common sense decisions about where to make our bets and what to do. And then we looked at this every quarter. So once we set the budget, with the assumptions around these strategic impact, length of the realization, and the opportunity for ROI, we then would lock it, and then every quarter we would review it. And if things were not working, we would make decisions about how much to taper back in investments or to accelerate investments by making dynamic resource allocation trade-offs to be able to do this effectively. We have seen some, but few, nonprofits that have that type of operating discipline. We think that this is more than important in today's environment. We think it's critical. And we think that every nonprofit needs to be leading that organization like a business where you're making these types of investment decisions in order to sustain your fundraising capabilities and to be able to make sure that you are engaging in the right manner, which is by channel, for instance, and in the right method with cadence to the donor and knowing how much to ask to optimize performance. And because we are dynamic in this, we can pivot with different types of campaigns, different balancing across channels to be able to do this and make the fundraising optimization just one more level precise, insightful, and successful over the course of time. So I'm happy to talk about this in more depth with you one-on-one. I'm going to tap off here now, but with 3 minutes to go, my personal email address is mzg at Microsoft. That was my old one. MZG, Michael Zachary Gorriarán, MZG at arjunasolutions.com. I thank you for your time. If you would like to contact me, I'd be more than delighted to do a briefing one-on-one. We have some assessment tools to assess your environment. Be happy to help you mitigate the effect of inflation with intelligent capabilities on behavioral economics modeling with AI simple services to ensure your success over the next 24 months in fundraising. We're going to be dealing with this inflation thing for all of 2023. So I hope that this is a critical part of your own planning, is do you have an inflation mitigation capability in-house to ensure you're successful at the optimal level with fundraising. But thank you very much for the time today. I really appreciate it. We're at your disposal.
Michael, if I could real quickly before you go, 2 quick questions came in. One is, are you still seeing direct mail have significant ROI?
Compelling. I'm happy, whoever asked the question, happy to give you some case studies. Some are on our website. You have to have the balance right between digital and direct mail, but we're seeing unbelievable improvements still in direct mail. One from Lyft above 100 and above 1,000 to 10,000 in giving. And if you can get the net proceeds side by reducing the volume so it's optimal for each individual donor, it's highly profitable, more than it has been, by getting the formula right.
Virginia asked, how do you successfully keep donors engaged?
I think the marketing campaigns obviously are critical. One piece is advancing the insights about the fulfillment of the mission. And then the second piece is when you're asking, right cadence and right request for the solicitation amount, and getting that solicitation amount connected to the fulfillment of the mission. If the solicitation is independent of the mission, which is just a money thing versus an impact thing, it's less effective.
So Michael, someone asked that reducing mail volume is counterintuitive. How do you know it won't hurt fundraising?
We know it because we're doing it. We have a lot of experience doing this, but we also know it's a person by person, individually personalized decision. And by being able to manage this idea of donor sentiment and model it effectively, that we get the right formula for each donor. And that's really where how they would be treated if they were a major donor. We're just doing this with direct response.
Okay. And last question here, Michael, given your experience in the nonprofit sector, what are the biggest barriers to starting or continuing to use these capabilities?
There is a profound resistance to change in the nonprofit sector, and doing something like this doesn't always fit neatly into somebody's existing operating plans. That's why we deliver this as a simple service. So I think we need to just do a quick sanity check on what's the 2023 operating plan. Do you have an inflation mitigation strategy? And can we seamlessly weave these capabilities into what you do and show a compelling ROI in a very reasonable amount of time? Usually the ROI optimization takes about 9 to 10 months to show up in terms of the full impact. It shows up along the way. And by doing that, you're in a situation where you can use existing practices, existing partnerships, and complement that with new capabilities that are very simple to implement.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for joining us today. There are 3 ways you can get in touch with us. One is through our website, www.arjunasolutions.com. As you see on the screen here, you can email Michael directly at mzg@arjunasolutions.com, or you can email me. I'm the head of marketing and communications here at Arjuna, and you can reach me at doug@arjunasolutions.com. So thanks all again, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time.